Well, thank you, John, for the warm Kappa Bear welcome. That feels good. You expect these skinny little Vata yoga types, and John and I kind of worried some people as we stepped in, but we got a lot of good work done, and so that was a lot of fun. Thank you for being here this morning. I appreciate you giving me some time to share some ideas. Dr. McClanahan set me up for this. She cued a number of things that you're going to hear now, so she's got you warmed up. You're primed. We're ready to go. And I really want to, whoever the organizing committee was, I'm just so thankful that I don't have to follow the cute little guy that sounds like the Geico lizard from Australia, because it's hard to beat a guy with an Australian accent. So stay tuned, and I'm the only one with pictures, so if it gets dull, you at least got something to look at, okay? So go get them, Lee, right? But before we start, I need to take a second to acknowledge somebody in the audience. Yeah. During the 4.5 years that this was my second full-time job, I logged a lot more frequent flyer miles with John than I did with my wife. And so Jennifer really did sacrifice a lot, our family sacrificed a lot, and so I want to acknowledge that. And as John pointed out, she started doing yoga long before I did, and she's also a yoga therapist herself, and she is my guru. She's the one that shines the light on my path. So this program's for you. So who's this guy standing up in front of you? Well, turns out my dharma, or my work seems to be, is I tend to look out on the horizon and say, what's next? It's happened all through my career. I've been very fortunate with that. The key thing is, when I see things coming, I try to get them going, but don't count on me to do the details of cleaning up. So when we were on the board, we did little things like start the certification process, a whole bunch of other things, and I said, okay, see ya, have fun with that. So understand this is purely about vision. I'm not the operational person. I'm hoping the operators are out there for us. And so what I'd like to do is invite you all to jump on the tour bus with me this morning for a few minutes and see what we can see out there on the edge of the horizon. But it's important you understand, not all of my ideas on the tour bus work so good. You can just ask Jennifer, or you can ask John. So they don't all stick, but what I want to do is, when I titled this, I said, let's stretch our vision, shall we? But the problem as we start to dive into our science is, quite literally, we know yoga isn't stretching, but now we know that stretching isn't stretching. Okay? Oh, shoot. Okay? Because stuff keeps dissolving, right? And obviously, vision isn't vision. What we see is vritti. It's not true vision. So I've got a real problem with the title of this slide already. So we may end up careening off onto the sidewalk a few times, but we'll have fun with it. And so as we do that and we start to look inward at ourselves, I think we need to take a second and realize collectively as a membership organization that we are suffering from, it's not a diagnosis because yoga therapists don't diagnose, but it's a yoga therapeutic assessment that we have a very acute malady, and I hope to shed a little light on that and see if we can rectify that. And I would call it Asmititis, okay? The Asmita, the false self. And that false self gets us into a lot of trouble if we aren't careful. And what we have we have clinical signs. And the clinical signs that I see regularly, and I spend a lot of my own time in it, so it's easy to talk about it. And so the first one, as a recovering physical therapist, is the idea that we're the healer or the doer of the work in yoga therapy, okay? And that's our culture. We swim in that culture. It's all about the individual. It's about pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps, all those sort of things. So we get trapped in that sense of I'm the doer, I'm the healer, I'm the yoga therapist, okay? And The next one is kind of the raga or the divisha around things like certification, the word therapy, our branding, our lineage, all those sort of things. Again, those are all those slippery traps that we fall into that bring us into the suffering of the Asmita that I mentioned. The third one then is, and that's the point of my talk, is our smallness of vision of who we are. Okay? And I'm going to invite us to see if we can stretch that. We won't pull any tendons or deform tissue that way, but let's take a look and see if we can find some ways that we might actually expand our vision behind whatever it is you think you are as a yoga therapist and we think we are as an organization. Let's see if we can expand that a bit. And so how are we going to do this? What kind of new lens can we put on to begin to see things a little differently? And when we do, it's a whole lot more fun, okay? So the first thing I want to invite is to try the lens on that what if yoga isn't an object, but it's a process or a how? Because how many times do we talk about, oh, I didn't do my yoga today? What? Yoga is how it is, right? I might not have remembered to remember that the how is happening. And so Dr. McClanahan had mentioned that. It's day-to-day, moment-to-moment. Yoga isn't an object. But again, in our culture, our bias is to see things as objects. I didn't do my asana. Oh, did you take care of your mother? Yes. Did you get angry at your mother? No, I was patient. I think you just did your yoga. That is the how, right? And so we need to appreciate it's not an object. And so we have a tendency towards that. And so when we look at that, then of course, I'm repeating this because that's part of learning, right? You hear it a second time. We're not the agent. We're not the ones causing the change. We want to be, okay? But we aren't. And so, and also the other isn't the other. When we sit with our client, their pain is our pain is their pain, their suffering is our suffering. Isn't that unity thing that we're supposed to be talking about? But again, our culture is, we've swum in this so long, it's easy to drift into that. And then finally, given those adjustments to your lenses then, what if all of us could work together to facilitate, and facilitate's a great word because the etymology of it is to make magic. What if we could make magic, or that radiance that Dr. McClanahan talked about, what if we could create an environment for that radiance to shine forth, the magic of that? And so there are two principles in modern language, and this is one of my big pushes in the business of yoga therapy, is we have to talk to our culture. And our culture understands certain languages that don't have a Sanskrit base, but they have a Sanskrit principle. The first one is emergence. And that's that surprise that comes out of dynamic complex systems. We can't possibly predict what's going to happen, okay? And so these fun things happen. The other principle is humility. Humus, earth, right? It's the base of us. And so again, that's that Asmita, that I think I have it, I think I understand. And that, of course, is pretty laughable once we stop and realize what we're saying. And so we're gonna take a peek at those a second, but that's a lot of words and theories. So what I want to do is interject right now a helper along the way. Hopefully it's a little better than Microsoft's Bob and Apple's Siri, but I want to introduce a little helper to us. And this helper, the helper's name is Pete the Sunflower, okay? So Pete the Sunflower is going to help us out this morning. And what happens is Pete was a sunflower. He was planted in November of last year, and he ended up being the runt of the litter. We had a whole bunch of sunflowers, but he was the runt, the little one, the straggler, the last one, the bloom. And he also has a New Jersey accent. I'll tell you more about that in a minute, but he has a New Jersey accent. So how did he come to be? Well, he came to be because this yogi right here, my father-in-law Ray, was living with us, and he wanted to plant some flowers. And so he and my wife went out and wanted to set up these little containers of sunflowers. And Jen was ready to go, okay, throw the dirt in there, stick the seeds in there, throw some water on, and away we go. And he goes, no. there's a principle called scarify. Scratch the seed, break the seed, okay? And he says it's an old farming principle, and essentially the scarify is to open or wound in order for the new growth to come forward, okay? And so it turns out he knows an awful lot of yoga as a very successful farmer. And you might ask, well, what's this got to do with my yoga therapy practice? Well, if we look at it, all of us go through this life with that sense of woundedness or suffering, exactly what Dr. McClanahan said. It's present, right? But what we do as yoga therapists is we remember our own scarification and we recognize that of the others, and then that seems to be that thing that creates the impetus or the spark that leads to the next generation, okay? So it's not so much that tired New Age principle of, oh, that happened for a reason, which is bogus, okay? What happens is life does generate those scars, those wounds for each and every one of us, but the question then is, how do we respond or carry that story forward? And what is that story that we carry forward? And that is what being human is. We tell stories to one another about the scarification. So let's take a look into Pete here, because he's going to bring us along. So what happened was Pete bloomed 2 days before Ray died. But what was great was he stood watch in the window, and he and Ray breathed together. Ray gave the carbon dioxide out, Pete gave the oxygen, and the two of them wove together, which is the yoga, right? And so he was in there moment to moment the last 36 hours or so. He had just bloomed. He was the last one from the ones that were planted. And after Ray let go of his last bit of water and carbon dioxide, Pete was there for the Jameson toast to the old Irishman. And it was in that moment that he was named. You know, who's this? He's been with us all along, right? And isn't it cool that he's got part of Grandpa in him, and Grandpa has part of him in him, okay? And we should take him along, because now we have to get Grandpa back to Iowa. So we packed him up with everything else, and he headed off a 1,400-mile trip with Adam and I to Iowa. Bouncing along. He got there a little worse for wear. But what Pete was doing was giving us a story to tell about how things continue. And so he kept traveling all the way up there. He was there for the funeral, the celebration, and within him, the seeds Pete has generated, of course, have Ray woven in, because that's our yoga therapy, right? That's who we are. That's the non-Asmita, right? We are all connected. We are all woven together. So he gives a beautiful story. And so the things we want to look at then is when we do this and we start to realize that in yoga therapy, we're sitting there and we're part of a natural process, as natural as the seed. Okay, if you go in there and you start digging at that seed and poking at it and pulling at it, nothing grows, right? So we sit with our client or our class, and we allow the emergence through the process that as we are with them and we understand we've all got these scars, these amazing things happen, and through that process, all of those effects of essentially what we would call watering, light, soil, time, that's what we're doing with our clients. And if we're really honest about it, yes, biologically we know scarification speeds up a seed, but we don't really understand what makes the seed grow. Ultimately, we don't. There's a mystery there. And so as yoga therapists, if we can sit in that mystery and that not knowing, create an environment to cultivate, but then let what comes forward bloom. And so what's fun is that a principle of emergence that I talked about, Well, all sorts of funny things happen. For instance, you get this studly, young, dark-haired, skinny Army captain who was all about do things, move things, get everything in order in the mid-1980s, and then you fast forward 15 years, and you get the amazing flying yogi. At the time of the Army picture, I had my Apple IIe computer, but there certainly weren't laptops like that, right? And so we don't know what happens. Something happens along the way, and John mentioned, we brought him into the health club as a business, purely a business idea. It's going to be hot. All right, let's get one. Well, I started going to this yoga thing for about 2 months, and my chronic debilitating back pain got better as a back care expert. And so, surprise, surprise. No wonder we're homeless and without a job, right? But each of you have your own story. Ha ha, why are you sitting there, right? Me at a yoga therapy conference? Yeah, right. Okay, we've all got that story. And we also have our students' stories of how, the people, especially if we've been teaching a while, all of a sudden we see the student just takes off with this. So that's that emergence, that surprise characteristic. And so the humility part, though, is that if we understand this whole thing of consciousness coming forward, delighting in its discovery of self with a capital S, then we get to appreciate a few things. And one of them is that, the smartest brains in the world, the astrophysicists, can only find about 5% of the expected universe. And we think we understand everything we need to know about yoga therapy or taking care of somebody. So there needs to be a little humility in that aspect. And the other part that's fun is 10 years ago even, if we talked about, another Earth-like planet, I wonder where that might be. But we know what yoga does, right? The longer we look, the more we see. And these are official statistics from NASA now, that they think there's over 1 billion Earth-like planets in our galaxy alone, and there are billions of galaxies. Would have been heresy not too long ago. So it's pretty exciting as that emerges, comes forward, as consciousness delights in discovering herself and giggles and laughs and says, ha ha, look at all these planets, right? And then, let's see. And then the term universe, which is interesting because in John Brockman's book, 100 Ideas That Must Die, world-renowned scientist, one of them is the idea of a single universe. He says it's goofing us up. It's a vritti. Got to get rid of it. Okay? So that kind of fun. Wait a minute. I just kind of had the idea of the Big Bang going. But it's Big Bangs inside of Big Bangs around Big Bangs. So what do we really know? We don't know anything, right? And that's a relief. It takes the pressure off. And then if we look at Dan Siegel's definition of mind, in his definition, he's at the UCLA Center for Mindfulness Studies. In that, he talks about not only the intrapersonal mind, but the interpersonal mind. And now the best neuroscientists in the world are beginning to look at this thing that's called extended consciousness. Okay? My consciousness is infiltrating your consciousness. Yours with your eye nods or your sleeping or whatever are affecting my consciousness, right? And so this principle of this consciousness thing that we yogis have known, like Dr. McClanahan said, we have 5,000 years of, we knew that. But it's catching up, and now it's part of who we are. The other thing is there's some really neat science, and Richie Davidson at University of Wisconsin has this nice little piece about these 4 principles that 20 years ago, when I was that Army guy, if we'd have talked about this sort of thing, it was complete heresy. But as yoga therapists, this is what we do. And what we do is, one, we know we have an effect on epigenetics. Again, she talked about that. The effect epi on top of genetics. That we have our genetics, but our environment and our lifestyle vastly influence that, and that's who we are. We have the power to help people modify their genetic expression. That's kind of cool, okay? And then the other one that we talk about is this mind-body idea. We all get this. We've all experienced it. But now he says conclusively, without a doubt, we've got incredible science to say that, yes, indeed, the body influences mind, mind influences the body. And not only that, but again, back to that influences the microbiome. And again, we're back to Pete. Now we know what the gut and our microbiome does, right? And so we have that effect going on. And then the neuroplastic change, it's been mentioned, but again, that was a dream, that was heresy. Now we know that's part of what we're doing. And the other thing that Dr. McClanahan talked about was the child's response to the straight line and two dots, or the straight line and the smile. Well, Richie Davidson and his group have done studies where they show a preference for pro-social behavior in 6-month-olds. That we come out wired to be pro-social and connected. We are integrated, okay? And so those are all things we do. Now, I just want to show this slide for a second. It's the map of what Roshi Joan Halifax calls the practices that prime us for compassion. So as yoga therapists, of course, our job is to help relieve suffering, and suffering is relieved when somebody recognizes it and works to create an environment to ease the suffering. And so on her website, upaya.com, she has the full study up there, or her review, and it's got all the literature on it. And so if you just go to, just Google her, and it'll be there under her resources, but it's got the science behind all 6 of these practice types, and this is what we do. We work on attention, we work on affect, we work on intention, sankopa, right? We work on insight, we obviously work on embodiment, but then our off the mat is the engagement. And it's a wonderful article, so I just point you to that because it's, again, a way of showing how everything we do is weaved into the fabric and the culture of who we are as human beings. And this was our tagline years ago. I know, Johnny, I don't know if we still use this at all, but we did use the second, from second sutra, or the 16th verse in the second pada, what, heyam dukam amalgam, future suffering can be relieved. So you should ask, so what? If you got a teenager, right, that's the question. So what? What am I going to do? Well, so what is a few things we can do. One, in our personal life, is just have fun beginning to rediscover all your asmitas. How often you take yourself so seriously, and about what that entails, and how it's your responsibility, and yada, 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 right? And also within your own practice, how well your practice is coming along, or how bad your practice is coming along, right? And then as we go through this certification process as a community, can we remain and stay with the principles of not getting attached to either negative or positive, but contributing and participating in this process of emergence as an organization? Another thing we can do is, if we're really serious about suffering, we need to step up and be the leaders of ahimsa. Okay, it's our first yama, right? Okay, well, I've tried very hard in the last 2 years to get this out to different organizations and different vendors, and nobody wants to talk about ahimsa as far as practice of yoga goes. Okay, so I charge the group to let's step up and really get strong about what this means as far as in the first violence. Thank you. And that first violence comes from our asmita. If we aren't suffering there, if we aren't stuck there, that moves along. And so in advancing these principles of risk management, later next fall, I'll have a 4-hour block that I'm going to provide to schools to teach the very simple principles that keep people safe and non-harmed. Okay, it's not rocket science, but nobody will talk about it. So I think we need to pick up on that. Now, take a look at our beloved Swami Vedabharte, huge supporter of IAYT. He left us last July in the physical plane, at least. But what he said was the practice of silence is more powerful than the practice of words. And so if you just gaze upon that smile, I'd suggest that we need to let silence emerge in our personal practice. We need to let it emerge in our classes, to not be afraid of that silence, right? And as an organization, we need to provide space as we start our meetings, as we work together. And I just want to single out that this past winter, when we had the little fun and excitement of the Yoga Alliance thing with the therapy question, that we didn't react and strike out and have some strong reaction, but actually we took our time and we were yogic about it. We look, how do we respond non-violently but in a powerful way? So I want to acknowledge the board's work that direction. And then our language is critical, and so I'm just going to zip through these, but in this wonderful edition that Kelly just put out, I have an article that talks about the importance of language. We need to meet our culture where it is, and so that's a resource. The other one is in the winter edition, Christine Weber and Brett Sculthorpe wrote a wonderful one on triple aim. If you don't know what triple aim is, go back and read the article, because this is how our culture talks about health. And guess what? Yoga therapy is a reasonably priced, cost-efficient modality. It creates patient value and satisfaction, and it has efficacious or backed findings of being valuable and useful. And that's who we are, but we need to be able to talk that language when we go in and talk to potential referral sources and go out in our communities and talk about. We are the triple aim, and that's what we've heard in these earlier talks. The next one is then this concept of organizational yoga therapy. Our Asmita is that we're all about treating an individual or a group in a group setting. But now they say that the highest evolved organism on the planet is not us as individuals, but it's the multinational corporations. Okay? They have a consciousness. Okay? And so we need to expand that and look at the science and the organizational science that's out there to go with that. And so that's a place we need to move. As far as the journal goes, we've got a big responsibility now to have a strong, powerful journal, but within that journal, we not only want to do what we've traditionally done as far as bringing forward quality research articles, but I think we need to, as IIYT, dealing with the complexity of integral health and philosophy, is we need to embrace the other forms of research that are out there. They're powerful, they're not traditional, they're not conventional, but they are robust in the sense of methodology for bringing forward who we are as yoga therapists. And then as we go through these different avenues of using these researches, I'd encourage the board, and I'm on the editorial board, that we step up and ask, how do we make this even more robust? How do we use the technology we have now to bring forward these important aspects? Because all of this leads us to a really touchy subject, and that's politics. And so Dr. SYTAR, I'm coming after your job, and I'm getting a haircut just like Donald Trump. No, and he won't even answer my mean tweets. I don't know what's wrong with it. I don't want your job. Yeah. But seriously, politics. We are political. That's who we are. Okay, and so this quote is a wonderful quote from. Anybody know who might have said this? About taking care of the common good and our vocation? Who? No, it was Pope Francis to Congress last fall. Okay. But this is who we are, about caring for the common good, taking care of that. That's who we are. And literally stimulating the growth. the scarifying, right? Yep. And so we have this larger vision of going through this process of conventional participation, but also the local social activism you do. That's a political process. Going through the different outlets that we find in our different empowerment and liberation structures, and that's what a lot of those research ones that I mentioned are. But one point that I want to bring across is there's a whole set of organizational development and design that's yogic in that it's based on the principles, and we need to embrace that as an organization because we can affect things at the institutional, the higher levels that way if we expand our vision of who we are. So Dr. McClanahan talked about this slide. You just have to have it, but it's only been 45 years that we've had that view of who we are, right? We are on this one blue planet. But this one blue planet's got a little pitta imbalance, okay? Every month, hotter, hotter, hotter. We're out of balance. And so we have to be able to assume our power to shift in the institutions because that's what's going to bring these changes. But within that, what they find is personal practice drives those changes. Okay, so we've got both of those. One other person I just want you to be aware of is in the modern culture is Friedrich Capra, who put this new book out, The System's View of Life, but he's very much a non-yogi yogi. And as Dr. McClanahan said, he addresses both the social and the ecological effects. And the word he uses is eco-literacy. So I want to leave you with that thought of eco-literacy. That's what we do as yogis. We teach that it's all woven together, right? And so I'm going to skip through that one. We all know our tools. We're going to take those tools out there, your presence being the most powerful one you take, and then the off-the-mat engagement for the participants. And finally, old Einstein said it right when he said, it's seeing with complexity and more dimensions that enables the development of simple solutions. That's what we do, right? And we do it, and if it feels overwhelming, don't forget Pete. So Pete, the runt, the scarred one, the tag-along with a Jersey accent, bears that secret of life, like we all do, okay? And so if we'll take care of one another as a community, if you'll take care of you, and in taking care, if we allow that emergence of the next surprise, as the Gita says, with equipoise, it's not so heavy. And in fact, it's light, and it's a brighter light. So thank you so much for sitting through my talk. Namaste.